Hello.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Good morning.
Hello.
Good morning to you, and thank you for being in Paris. I mean, we are so emotionally proud that you are here in Paris. So please, let's start the question. Where's the first question? Over here, please.
Hi. Thank you for being in Paris and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Ma question est, l'histoire du film se passe dans les années 70, mais le propos est quand même très très moderne par rapport à la liberté de la presse. Je voulais savoir si c'était justement ça qui vous avait intéressé, ce côté très moderne de l'histoire. Est-ce que vous pensez que la presse doit encore se battre aujourd'hui comme elle le faisait dans les années 70?
Well, obviously we're very much in the 70s, but this is a very modern take, and this is unfortunately a very relevant question about freedom of the press. Is that what interests you most in the Post? And do you feel that the press can fight as hard nowadays as it could in the 70s?
The press has to fight harder today because the press is under attack more today than they ever were in the 70s. So they have to fight harder to essentially, fight for their own dignity in the truth that they're telling the general public. But my first attraction to the script, before I thought about any of the obvious relevant connections between 1971 and 2017, was the character of Katharine Graham and her relationship with Ben Bradlee. That was the first thing that popped off the page for me. A story about a woman in a great position of authority who did not know how to sustain that authority because she hadn't yet found her voice.
Question ici.
Bonjour, Olivier Boucreux, Télé 7 jours. Donc c'est une question pour tous les trois, en fait. Je voudrais savoir ce que vous avez appris, en fait, de cette histoire, de votre personnage, de votre partenaire et peut-être de vous-même avec ce film.
Well, this is really a question for the three of you. Doing the Post, I mean, basically, what did each of you learn about maybe the story, about through your character, maybe about your co-actor, and possibly even about yourselves?
Take it away, Meryl.
Yeah, Meryl. Let's hear you.
Well, the more I learned about Katharine Graham, the more I was in awe of her. Her intellect, her stamina, her curiosity, her ability to lead and in the most graceful way, and her writing ability, because she wrote a 780-page autobiography that won the Pulitzer Prize. That was yet another revelation to the people who knew her. But the most important thing I learned in reading about her in talking to her children and in talking to the woman who assisted her in researching the autobiography and the woman who assisted her as a colleague for 30 years, was how insecure she was how consistently self-doubting she was. And that's something that I think gives a particular poignancy to this story, because that's the story of many, many, many women, not just of her generation, but of women now who emerge into leadership roles and still suffer the same kinds of crippling curbs on their ability to step forward, to be aggressive, to take risks, to lead, in essence. So that was the surprise. I share many of those insecurities, and I thought, well, that's because you're an actor, and it serves you to deconstruct yourself every time and to take down your confidence, because that's when you leave yourself vulnerable, and that's when you can actually do the work of an actor. But I suspect that there's the other thing too that accompanies many women as they become bigger than they ever thought they would be.
What about you, Tom?
Well, the overpowering fact that I learned about Ben Bradlee, I had met Ben Bradlee before. I had met him through Nora Ephron. We had had dinner. I'd been at his home. I knew Sally Quinn, his wife, very well. She and I spent an awful lot of time together talking about the man. His enthusiasm for what he did matched, I think, his sense of responsibility to being a journalist. And in the case of specifically this week in his life, in the life of Katharine Graham, he had this dictum: the truth is the truth, and you got to run it. If it's the fact, you got to put it there. And otherwise, if you're not, why have a newspaper? Why have the job? Why try to sell? Why to sell copies of the daily events for 50 cents a piece? That is a very forceful, and what's the word I'm looking for? I think that's a kind of like there's a surety to that comes into the way. Luckily, I got to approach the workday. I can't. I've worked with Steven for 5 times. I am empowered by his dictum to me, which is go out, find out everything you can about the guy and the event, and then on the set, show me what you have. That's a luxury that I've been able to enjoy multiple times. What I have not, what was new territory for me was being in the same movie with Meryl Streep, and it just so happens, I think, that these two characters blended in nicely for ourselves. The confidence that I had because I was familiar with the territory, and the mystery of working with Steven that enshrouded Meryl through the course. I must say I got to stand back and quietly enjoy the fact that I had sandbagged her by not telling her that Steven does not rehearse. We better know our stuff. We better have ideas. We better come and get it. And the first couple of days, she was just so flummoxed by that reality.
You loved it.
I loved every minute of it. I just loved watching her squirm and wonder what the heck is going on. And I just kind of like, hey, babe, you got to keep up. Let's keep up. Keep up with us now. It was fun.
All right, next question then. Over here. Devant. You have the mic here? Yeah. It's your go. You have the mic.
Okay, sorry. I'm Marcus, tutor from Berlin, and this is a question from Mr. Spielberg. Mr. Spielberg, I read that you were in the middle of your next big science fiction movie and then decided to make the post because you thought it's so urgent to do this movie. Could you explain with your own words what maybe has to do with the situation in the States?
Well, it's very sobering when I'm making a science fiction movie where there are no rules. Science fiction, it allows the limited use of the range of your imagination. And of course, then when I read about this true story about what happened in 1971 with Nixon going after the New York Times and the Washington Post, and then a woman looking to, be able to find herself in a sea of men, and there was so much relevance to both of those topics that I suddenly started to celebrate history again, thinking it's great to use your imagination, and where the sky's the limit, literally. But what happens when you are limited by the facts of what took place? I feel so comfortable allowing history to be the co-author of my movies, actually more comfortable in that genre than I am, or I certainly used to be, in the genre of limitless musings and dreamings. So this was a great relief to me to read the script. And I also obviously felt, okay, we got
Coffee machine.
Coffee machine. And the coffee machines in 1971 were nothing like that. It took a half an hour to get your coffee warm in 1971, at least that. But it also took a lot longer to print a newspaper. And one of the great joys of this movie is being able to show all of you the craft and the art of news printing. Reporting is pretty much the same. News gathering is pretty much the same, except back then you had to have enough change in your pocket to use the rotary telephone, in the phone booths. You had to hail a cab. You had to knock on a door. You had to get your sources to answer the door. You know, today it's actually not as complicated because less legwork, but because there's so much competitive landscape, there are so many stories and there are so many sources to disseminate those stories, and it's much more competitive. In that sense, it's a lot harder today to succeed in this business. But the one thing that both of these eras have in common that really attracted me also to tell this story is two presidents declaring war on the news media. Nixon did not succeed, and he wound up, resigning. And I really feel that we shall overcome what all of us have been subjected to over the past 16 months.
Bonjour, Barbara Appel du Journal du Dimanche. Je voulais savoir, Steven, ce qui vous pousse toujours à tourner à un rythme assez effréné. Vous avez deux films qui sortent l'un dans la foulée de l'autre. Et qu'est-ce qui vous donne toujours envie de réaliser des films et qu'est-ce qui, pour vous, fait une bonne histoire?
Well, obviously you have two films almost coming out in a row. I mean, Barbara wanted to know what pushes you really every time, what gives you the joy and the wish to work on such a frantic rhythm, and what is to you the essence of a good story?
I think the thing that gets me to keep working with enthusiasm and a lot of energy is the same thing that got Ben Bradlee to get up every single morning, which all he cared about was a good story. He wanted a good kick-in-the-ass story, and he would go to great lengths to find the story and to go to Kay Graham to get her to allow him to publish the story. But I'm fired up the same way Ben Bradlee was fired up. All I need is a good story. And I lose 20 years of chronological age. I'm suddenly 50 years old again. So 15. Well, sometimes I act like I'm 15, but I feel like I'm 50.
Hello, Mr. Spielberg. It's a question for you. It's your first newspaper movie, like All the President's Men. So did you think of a specific style to tell this story, or did it come to you immediately, naturally?
The style of telling the story came to me pretty quickly because I worked very, very closely with the second writer, Josh Singer, who did, I think, 27 drafts of the script after I had read the initial Liz Hannah script, which was a very, very good script, and got this whole sort of show on the road. But just in infusing the script with Josh with a lot of energy, scenes being short, scenes not being 7 pages, but being 2 pages, sometimes 1.5 pages, it made me feel like we were telling the story from the point of view of a news department, which is a hard-hitting, energetic a pursuit of information and of the truth. And that energy of feeling like we were in a newsroom while telling the story, combined with the limited amount of time I had in order to get this story out this year, I think gave this the whole, that was responsible for the style this film was shot in.
Question ici, là-bas, le micro. Oui, oui, vous l'avez.
Hello. My question is for you, Steven. It's perhaps your first press movie, but also your first feminist movie. Do you consider this film, because we are living an incredible time of transition for women now, so do you consider that it is also your first feminist movie?
No, my first feminist movie was The Color Purple. That was my first feminist movie. And that came from experience because I had a very strong mom. I've been raised in a world of women. I have 3 younger sisters. I have no brothers. Every single person that's run my company has been a woman. Every department currently at Amblin Partners, every single department is headed by a woman. And this is the world that I'm most comfortable living in, which probably qualifies me to be the right choice to direct the Pentagon Papers.
Bonjour, je suis David Mikalowski du Point Pop. C'est une question destinée à Steven Spielberg. Désolé. En fait, The Paper, Pentagon Papers, se termine pile là où Les Hommes du Président commencent. Et je souhaitais savoir quelle a été l'influence du film de Pakula sur le vôtre, et aussi quels sont les points communs et les différences entre les deux films.
Well, obviously, at the end of your movie, I mean, we see the premises, obviously, of Watergate. I mean, would you say that Pakula's film influenced you in some ways, or not at all?
Well, I think All the President's Men is the greatest newspaper movie ever shot. I'm just happy to be, you know, somewhere in the realm of, as a cousin to that greatest story of journalism. And I honored Alan Pakula, who I never met, by the way, by ending our film with some of the same angles he used to begin his film, All the President's Men, with the break-in at the Watergate at the Democratic National Committee headquarters. But at the same time, our film is completely different than that film. And you can certainly refer to our film as a prequel to All the President's Men, but I really believe, and I think history really believes, that without the courage of Ben Bradlee and Katharine Graham to do what they did against a court order, leveled by Judge Murray Gorfine of an appellate court against the New York Times, for them to act at that moment in time gave such credibility to the Washington Post. They went from the second newspaper in Washington, D.C. The first was the Washington Star. They went from the also ran to a major local paper and also national paper because of just the Pentagon Papers story. And I really believe that led to the courage that Katharine Graham had and Ben Bradlee certainly had to then pursue, through Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, all the money trails that led directly to the resignation of Richard Nixon. So I think we're more than just a prequel in that sense.
Hi, I'm Asking from Brain Damaged. I have a question for Meryl about your character. It's a very strong woman, even though we don't see it. How did you do to work on your ability to perform a woman that looks weak, but at the same time is so powerful and has to stand up to all the men that direct her, that want to direct her in a way, even if she's the director of the paper she owns?
Well, I've been in meetings where I've made a suggestion, meetings where I'm one of 2 women and there are 6 to 9 men, and a woman will suggest something and everybody go, yeah, and then the men will talk about it, and the same suggestion will come out of a man's mouth, and somebody goes, that's where we have to go. That's the kind of thinking we need to hear. And I don't know one woman that has not been in that meeting. And so we all share the understanding of what this is and where we are sort of in the evolutionary scale of, human progress. We're getting there, but we're not there yet. So this comes at a particularly interesting moment, this film. When the first iteration of the script came to Amy Pascal, who's the first producer of it, she bought it 6 days before the election, where she fully anticipated that Hillary Clinton would be the president of the United States, first female president. And this would be kind of a nostalgic look back at the origin story of that kind of leadership. Suddenly, we had a different film and a different necessity. And so I think it really is a testament to Steven and to Josh Singer, who came in to dovetail these 2 stories. One, it was almost, in some ways, an apartheid story, because there was the woman's world, and then there was the newsroom, which was mostly men. And that is the way the world was. I remember it very well in 1971. So yeah, I think it's an accurate depiction of the world. For young women, it'll come, and young men, it'll be sort of a revelation that things were that recently so different.
Oui, bonjour, Marc Choquet pour Chérie. Aujourd'hui, c'est mon anniversaire. Alors,
Bon anniversaire.
Merci, justement, je voulais vous faire, je vais poser ma question très rapidement et vous faire une déclaration. On s'était rencontrés il y a 2 ans pour un été à Osage County. Je voulais juste vous dire que vous êtes la plus belle et la plus grande actrice du monde. Je me suis fait mon petit cadeau, donc voilà, je voulais permis de le dire.
God. Wow.
Et puis, vraiment, j'en garde un très bon souvenir. Et puis, vous dire, tout simplement, si aussi Pentagon Papers n'est pas aussi un bel hommage à toutes les femmes aussi, à travers le monde, et en fonction de tout ce qu'elle a apporté aussi. C'est un film sur la liberté de la presse, mais je pense que c'est aussi un bel hommage à toutes les femmes. Merci en tout cas de m'avoir écouté.
Merci, merci, monsieur. Happy birthday.
Thank you so much. This was a love declaration to Meryl. Sorry, you guys. But it's also how this film is a tribute to all women, including obviously the freedom of the press. But you know, Tom, actually, you
No, this was all about a love letter to Meryl. You don't have to throw me the scraps. That's all right.
But the thing is, when you said that you sort of played with Meryl because you didn't tell that you would not improvise and all that. But really, I mean, and I remember that in this script it says this is the week Katharine Graham became Katharine Graham. Did you really thought about that to really change your the way you played, you co-starred with Meryl? Did it sort of feed in a way the dance?
I was very much aware of, between the research and the conversations that I had with the principals. There is an element to the film that was not necessarily written. What was very much a part of Ben Bradlee himself is that he knew the cost of being Katharine Graham prior to the week that the movie is made. He knew that the newspaper had been her father's. He knew that her father had given the newspaper to her husband rather than her. He knew the tragic circumstances of her husband's death. He knew that this was not a standard circumstance of an employer running a newspaper. He admired the fact that she was taking on this responsibility and sooner or later was going to have to come to this place to make a decision for which there was no certain victory on either way. When I first read the screenplay and knew that this was the story of how Katharine Graham became Katharine Graham, the key to it, both in Liz Hannah's original screenplay and then much, by the time we got to the place and much had been added onto the story, it even amplified more so this extraordinary moment that I think is right out of High Noon or The Godfather or Dr. Strangelove or any number of other great films in which Katharine Graham has to say go or no go, publish or not publish. If she publishes, she could go to jail and lose everything. If she does not publish, what's the point of having a newspaper and being the boss? There is no, the risk on that is extraordinary. And I loved the fact that I felt that it was a selfish thing that I had in my pocket, that I was the guy on the phone. I was playing the guy on the phone who said, you've got to do it. Everybody else was saying, don't, you can't, you mustn't, I wouldn't. And I'm the one guy on the phone saying, you got to. And so in that case, I think one of the most exciting moments I had in all of my career was being on a phone in a tent, off stage, hearing Meryl Streep make the decision that really drives the movie forward.
The last time, if I could just throw that's beautifully spoken, Tom. And the last time, the one movie, I didn't tell this to you, Meryl, or you, Tom, either, but I told it earlier in another interview. But the one movie, because I find phone calls, frankly, and movies to be completely boring. The movie that the phone call wasn't boring in was Alfred Hitchcock's Dial M for Murder. Okay? That was going through my mind. What is the Dial M for Murder version to allow Katharine Graham not to be garroted by the man behind the curtain, which was Arthur Parsons?
After that last question, all right.
Hi, Thibaut Van Der from Belgium. It's a question for Meryl. How did you build a character like that? And you played journalist before. Did your character in Robert Redford's Lines for Lambs help you to build this character, which is in another level in the journalism business?
Not at all. Yeah, I had even forgotten I made that movie, frankly, until you brought it up.
But you'll never forget you made this one.
I think the crucial difference actually is that I wasn't playing a journalist That's the journalist. That's the and the way that Tom brought that kind of galvanizing, testosterone-driven, aggressive, news-gathering appetite to this part. He was the sort of seat and center of her ability to make that decision. Her courage came from that partnership. And to me, one of the most interesting parts of this entire script is that it is not just the story of Katharine Graham becoming Katharine Graham. It is about a partnership, a working partnership. It's about the work that a man and a woman did that sort of shifted history. You, in the first scenes in this movie, you don't really know that he isn't her boss because he acts like her boss. And you know, in some ways, I think she probably thought she deferred to him. But how their relationship grew, and over time, I think that it was so fruitful, important, and for us, in a movie, you never see that. You never see a relationship like this one. It's definitely, they loved each other. They definitely did. I've seen footage of Ben Bradlee speaking at Katharine Graham's memorial that is soul-shattering. He loved her so deeply. But that's not what the movie's about, and that's not what their working relationship was about. And you are amazing in this film, and thank you for that.
I adore you, Meryl.
We kissed on screen for the first time last night on French television. I just want you to know.
You'll see it on Monday. Set your VCRs. Make sure you download it. It's going to be an extraordinary moment.
Well, on these words of love, thank you for bringing Pentagon Papers to us.